oh my God, like, general artificial intelligence is here and it's going to take over the world and we'll all be out of jobs.
Yep.
And
Yep.
if you've played with any of these technologies, you know that it's not true. It's really powerful,
Yep.
but it's just a tool to augment what we do. It's not going to take over. And so I think that's like where, people have to be a little skeptical.
Hello and welcome everyone to a brand new episode of the Auto Tech Show, our podcast that dives into all things automotive innovation and technology. My name is Mark Babin, your host, and it's a pleasure to have all of you with me for this great new episode. And what an episode it's going to be. We're riding the hot trend, everything that is generative AI, something we've seen on front page news sites around the world, and perhaps something you're already using on a daily basis. But how does generative AI impact the automotive industry? And what should OEMs expect in terms of integrating it into their current processes? To help me break down this conversation, I'm very excited to welcome Rana el Kaliouby. She is the Deputy CEO at Smart Eye and founder at Affectiva, and has been recognized on Fortune's 40 Under 40, Forbes America's top 50 women in tech, and is a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. She holds PhD from University of Cambridge and a Post Doctorate from MIT. Rana, thank you so much for being with me today. I can't wait to get your insights on this topic. It's a pleasure to have you. And again, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mark. I'm excited to be doing this.
Absolutely. It's going to be a fantastic talk. And as I said, you're a true expert on the industry and this topic in general. So I'm really looking forward to what you have to say. But before we jump into the topic, I have to pause and take a well-deserved moment to congratulate you on being nominated as an Eisenhower Fellow. Now, for those of us and listeners who are perhaps new to what this is, can you explain a bit of the history of the fellowship and what it means for you to be nominated to such an elite class?
Oh, thank you. So President Eisenhower back in the day created this fellowship where he invited 20 international scholars to come to the United States and spend about 6 months. Really, the idea was cross-pollination and peacemaking. His idea was that if people got to know each other, it would promote peace. And then more recently, they started a U.S. fellowship where 10, it's very selective. So only 10 U.S. scholars get sent abroad. So I'm one of the 10 this year. And I'll be, my fellowship will be focused on exploring AI ecosystems, both startups and innovators and investors, but also legislation and regulation, both in the EU and in India. So I'll be spending a couple of weeks in Belgium and then head to India for a couple more weeks. And I can't wait. It'll be in the fall. And I think it'll be a great opportunity to see what's happening in AI. I'm very immersed in the AI space in the US, but I'm curious what else is happening around the world.
Yeah, I think the geographical differences of how everyone's adopting it and like you said, the legal compliance side is super interesting and one we hear a lot about in our discussions with various industry operators and everything. So that'd be super fascinating. Do you have any expectations or do you go in quite open to what you're going to discover?
You're actually kind of encouraged to be very open-minded and not over-script the fellowship. My goal is to, for example, the European Union is very ahead of the game when it comes to regulation and legislation. There's an AI Act that's under basically review at the moment in the EU, and I want to kind of meet people who are in the kitchen creating that. But another angle that I'm super passionate about is just getting more women and more diversity in AI. And so I want to see who are the women founders or women investors in the AI space.
Yeah, such an important topic.
Back.
Yeah, I think now we have to have a follow-up on this topic alone. So yeah. I'm already going to find a schedule block for you in the winter. That's fantastic. Great. Well, congratulations again and best of luck with it. And again, I can't wait to hear what you discover and how we learn more and adopt AI around the world because of the work you're going to do. So it's absolutely fantastic. So let's dive straight into the main topic of today's title, of course, by bringing it into focus. Now, we hear the term software-defined vehicle increasingly as cars become smarter. They essentially become computers on wheels more and more every day. Can you explain best what the concept of the software-defined vehicle means for our listeners and how generative AI will continue to shape the development of this over the immediate future?
Yeah. So if you look at like car architectures today, there's all these like disparate systems that are composed of like a hardware component and then a little bit of software on top, and then another hardware component, a little bit of software on top. And for the most part, these software systems do not really talk to each other. They might kind of interface, but it's very minimal. So Tesla, of course, was the first automotive company to put this into existence, where there's one hardware platform and then one software layer that starts with an operating system, if you like, for the car, and then all sorts of functionalities are built on that software layer. And so that allows the functionality of the car to be much more intelligent. It allows for a lot more automation and a lot more intelligence, but also faster iterations. And I think that's the biggest difference that we're seeing. You can iterate on these software platforms super fast. You can add features, update, upgrade at a much faster iterative cycle, which also is one of the key advantages of machine learning, and generative AI is one example, is the latest kind of advancement in the AI space. It allows you to ingest a ton of data and learn quicker, upgrade, and learn faster. Generative AI, what is really exciting is that we now have these like super intelligent language models that have transformed how we interact with machines, really. And I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, I think those are some really good benefits that we'll touch on, and I do want to get to that. But just based on what you said, is there a limit to how many iterations can happen? Are we going to hit sort of that ceiling at some point, and then a new innovation is going to have to break that ceiling? Or is this sort of an endless road, more or less?
I think the holy grail, which I'm already, by the way, seeing innovations come out of MIT in that space. At the moment, you have to like pre-train a model, pre-train a machine learning model or a large language model. Like I'll use ChatGPT as an example because most people are aware of that one. There's many others, but let's just stick with ChatGPT. But you pre-train that thing in the cloud, and then you kind of unleash it for people to use it. And then, a few months pass by and now there's new data. So you retrain it and then you kind of publish it. What I'm seeing as kind of the next wave of innovation are these continuous online learning models that learn on the go, which would be amazing, right? Like as these models are in production, if you like, in the car context, as they're in production, they're ingesting data and they're learning on the go, just like humans do, really. So that'll be exciting to see. But I think we're still probably a couple of years out from seeing that.
Yeah, and I think too, what a lot of people don't realize is what we see today on the market, something that was been in development for the last decade, especially in this space. That's probably going to continue to be true, right?
I think it'll continue to be true, but I'm seeing these cycles, these kind of production cycles, get reduced in terms of the number of years. So you don't have to freeze the software, 4 years ahead. That's like too long in the software world. Even a year is long, but that I would say we're about at the 2-year mark, right? 2 to 3 year mark right now.
Okay, so that allows things to come up fairly quickly. And again, I think ChatGPT is a good example because that's suddenly, people discover what AI is, but AI has been in practice for decades in the past. I know the work you do, what we do as well, but this is kind of everyone's first experience with it on a hands-on basis that they're aware of anyway.
Right. It feels to a lot of people like this came out of the blue, but to your point, it hasn't. It's been in development for many years.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at the benefits and the primary benefits of the software-defined vehicle, what do you see? Now you mentioned a few there. Obviously, real time. We can learn quicker. We can have these sort of real time updates come to a vehicle. Are there other primary benefits that you see being taken advantage of in the industry?
Yeah, I would say faster innovation cycles, or it empowers or it allows for just better innovation because you've got this platform. You don't have to reinvent the components every time you want to try something new. You've got this platform already in there, and it's much easier to plug in new features. In our world, what's really exciting about the software-defined vehicle is, we do interior sensing. We want to be the perception, the eyes and ears of the car, everything that happens inside the car, like what's happening with the driver, what's happening with the other occupants, what's happening in the vehicle, like what's the vibe, what's the environment like, what are the objects. And so And that allows us to then very easily interface with other parts of the car, like other HMI systems, other output systems in the vehicle. So it will accelerate bringing to market interior sensing features for sure.
Do you feel like, from a consumer point of view, that everyone's kind of ready for all of this? This is all, I mean, just the things you mentioned there, I can see a lot of people kind of putting their hand up going, whoa, whoa, whoa. Do we find people being quite adaptive and quite open to this? Like, how do you find it from your business point of view?
It's a really good question. I think it's still kind of magical. It still feels magical to a lot of people when I kind of explain what we do. I do think some things are closer to market. So, for example, we do driver monitoring systems, right? And the idea there is you have a camera sensor somewhere in the vehicle, like say the dashboard or the rear view mirror, and it is able to identify if a driver is texting while driving, or they're falling asleep, or they're tired or inattentive. Eventually, we'll be able to tell if a driver is intoxicated. We're working on that in our research lab. But that people can wrap their heads around. They're like, oh, yeah, I get it. Is that like the lane control kind of system? Like, yeah, that's kind of an updated version of the lane control. But then when I talk about, well, it will be able to detect your emotions and the emotions of the people in the car, and then it will transform the mobility experience. And now with conversational interfaces like chat, like GPT, that I think was just going to redefine what it means to have an in-car voice assistant. I think it's going to be like really cool what you can do in the car. And that I think is a little like more, it's a little futuristic.
It'll take a bit of time for people to adapt to. But again, if we look at what we're dealing with now, tell someone that a couple of years ago and they would have said it's, that's way too far ahead. I'm not open to that. But you're right. I think people, as it's adopted, then they can sort of openly accept it. Like lane control would have been intrusive 10 years ago. Right. Now it's common on every vehicle you see. And that's, I guess, what you guys want as well down the road, is for these innovations to be what people expect.
Exactly. And as long as you're adding value to the end consumer, I think we're going to, we'll see the adoption for sure. Yeah. I mean, we already are in over 1 million vehicles on the road in terms of like driver monitoring. So that's exciting.
That is exciting. Yeah. Some of the OEM brands you work with it's an impressive list, and it shows that this is the future. This is a hard trend. This isn't something that's going to fade away. This is happening. It's just going to be how people adopt it, and then how you implement it, and how the OEMs implement it. And that really bridges really well to what I want to talk about, and how OEMs and operators can leverage the benefits of generative AI. So when we look at that and how they would integrate it, do you have any recommendations on how they should approach integrating the technology into their internal processes? Obviously, there's a lot of change has to happen really quickly, but what are sort of your recommendations on how they should look at this?
So I spearhead the AI strategy at Smarta, and I like to think of this in 2 buckets. One bucket is, how do we leverage generative AI in our core products and how we actually create our core products? And then the other bucket is, how do you leverage generative AI across the organization? So it could be in sales and marketing, it could be in finance, it could be in operations. So when I think about it in the first bucket, which is how generative AI is going to change how we do and produce our products, we're an AI company, and we use, up to this point, we've been using deep learning and computer vision to generate our technology and our algorithms. Moving forward, I do imagine we will use large language models, or the multimodal version of large language models that can deal with images and videos. But it's not quite there yet. It's still a little early. They're very clunky. They're very computationally intensive. Like, there's no way they would work on an automotive embedded chip yet. So we're keeping an eye on the latest innovations. We're definitely using this technology for data synthesis, which we then use to train our algorithms. Like, these deep learning models are so data hungry, and we have our own data collection team, but that's very expensive. Yeah. So when we can augment it with synthetic data, that's pretty powerful. So that we've been doing this for a while, actually, for a couple of years now. And then on the kind of organizational level, we're incorporating GPT in how we generate content, for example, and how we think about even like innovative and creative ideas. We haven't quite integrated it into our finance and maybe operations yet, but it's something we're looking into.
Okay, so step by step is perhaps a good way to go about it. Do one step, learn how it works, figure it out, optimize it, then move on rather than take on too much at once.
I would say yes, definitely. Like learn and iterate and stay at the forefront of all these tools and technologies, but also encourage. It doesn't just have to be led by the technical team. I mean, I want to give a shout out to our marketing team. They're so they're just experimenting and trying out all these new technologies, and I love that.
Yeah, those creative minds, you got to let them flow sometimes. And this seems like a really good field, perhaps, to let them run around on.
Totally.
And I guess that like that internal culture that you seem to have, I mean, obviously your company is about this, but to have that culture really support innovation and support this cultural shift has to be equally as important as what actually gets implemented at the end of the day.
I love that you mentioned that, because what I see is that often culture is the biggest challenge, especially actually with some of the tier ones and OEMs that we work with. It's a cultural shift. You have to think faster. You have to think iterative. You have to be comfortable experimenting, and not everything will work out. Some tools and technologies you'll try out and they'll fail or they won't work out, and that's okay. So it's definitely a cultural shift as well, a mindset shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Shifting to that, and again, that transitions really well. But when we look at barriers that a lot of these OEMs and operators will face, do you feel like the cultural shift is one of those barriers? And if so, how do you prevent that? How do you overcome that?
Yeah, I would say make AI a cross-functional, like an organizational initiative. It's not something that the R&D team is creating and it's going to like roll out to the company. What we've been doing, and I think we could do more of, are these sessions where it's almost educational. Like, guys, here's the latest and greatest around AI. Here's what's been in the news in the last month or so. Here are some tools that you could try. Here are some pitfalls that you should be aware of, right? Especially in the early days. I mean, still, right, with these large language models, we had to tell our team, you can't just upload our source code or, very confidential contracts with clients, for example. You have to be really careful and really understand, because not everybody's an AI expert, right? It's fair. So a lot of people don't really understand where's this data going and how could it potentially be used or misused. And so just educating people and making AI more accessible and taking away that fear, like the fear of the unknown. I think that's been a lot of what we've been trying to do, and just approach it from an excitement and an adventure kind of thing. Yeah,
I think that's great. And you touched on it. Something that really kind of intrigues me is how teams communicate. And I think this is a great example with what you guys do, again, because it's so ingrained in your culture. How can companies looking to adopt this new mentality encourage their teams to connect? Because as you mentioned, I think a lot of the OEMs in the top tiers are more conservative, more sort of react. Their teams are almost separate silos. But how do you bridge that gap? How do you open those doors?
Yeah. One thing that I would give credit to, I did my postdoc at the MIT Media Lab, and it's this incredibly interdisciplinary adult playground is what I like to call it. It's just like there's about 25 different research groups, but the space is open. You're encouraged to collaborate and connect with other people in other groups and come up with these crazy ideas of mashing together like idea from group one with idea from group two and creating this totally new thing. And again, you don't know ahead of time if it's going to work, and that's okay. I think that's the secret sauce. Like, it is okay to experiment regardless of the outcome. And a lot of companies overthink, what's the KPI of success? How are we going to know that we're successful? And part of it is like, you don't even need to be successful because you're going to learn from that experiment. And so, yeah, adopting this kind of experimentation mindset is really important.
I think super. Yeah. Especially when we look at generative AI and how new it is and how maybe misunderstood it is by some departments, perhaps more than other departments who are more ingrained in the technology. I mean, just looking at our company as an example, we have an engineering team and a deep learning team. They will understand this topic a whole lot more than maybe a marketing team member or someone like that. So I think really opening those doors and allowing that communication to happen, as you said, can further increase the likelihood that it's adopted company wide and it shifts that culture. Your company obviously been doing this for a while. Does that make sense? Is that kind of a truth?
Yeah, I think that's totally a truth. And you know what, too? I think executive sponsorship is so important.
Great point.
It has to come from kind of the CEO and the senior leadership of the company. They basically have to say, we are an AI company. We are going to be at the forefront of this. I think that's so important.
Do you see, and that's really interesting that you said that, do you see automotive companies shifting gears and saying, rather than just being an automotive company, we're an AI company now? Do you see that happening, or will that always be sort of a secondary thing where they find suppliers or they find vendors to sort of manage that for them?
It's definitely something that's conversations we definitely have with a lot of tier ones and some OEMs.
Okay.
Right. Not, but I still think there's a huge cultural gap. Like it's one thing to say, we're going to be an AI company, and it's totally a different thing to actually bring that into motion. Because it requires hiring the right people, attracting the right talent, right? But I will say there are definitely some tier ones that are ahead of the game and taking this serious, even if it will cannibalize some of their existing business. So
right. But it's a shift that has to happen. And perhaps that competitive nature is what's going to spur on others. When we see other markets and other geographic regions pushing farther, faster, that's only going to have to force you to react, or I guess react or die, really, is what it comes down to.
We're also seeing this trend where OEMs want to work directly with software suppliers. And so I think there's going to be a new class of software tier ones that have a tech background like us, right? And can now like service and work directly with the OEMs in collaboration with a tier one. But traditionally we would have to contract with a tier one that then contracts with an OEM. And now we're going directly to OEMs. So that's an interesting shift in the market too. It'll take time because it's the automotive industry, but we're definitely seeing that shift.
The amount of times I heard that phrase over the last couple of years, it's going to take time because it's the automotive, but it's true. It's a culture of the automotive industry. It's just traditionally like that. And maybe varies geographic region wise, but you're right. I think it's music to a lot of people's ears, knowing that that sort of middle person is not going to be, it's going to be direct, as you said. And I think that's exciting for a lot of providers and software providers. Great. So the last thing I'd love to touch on is just taking a step back when we look at the auto industry in general. So really taking that step back, looking at it holistically, what specific areas within the industry do you see will have the most potential benefit when we look at adopting generative AI? Is there a specific niche within the industry that you see it happening? I'd love to know your thoughts here.
Well, I definitely think we're going to just see a whole different new class of in-car voice assistants. Like the voice assistant today is very transactional. You ask it something, it does it for you, like very short. And with large language models, these interfaces are becoming way more conversational. And I think that's going to help with safety. It's going to help with productivity, entertainment. I really do think, and I actually look forward to that. I think that's going to be very exciting in the car. And then, of course, the marriage of our technology, which is driver monitoring and interior sensing, with some of these generative AI capabilities. Can't talk too much about that, but I think that's going to be really exciting. We're planning some cool things for CES. So we'll
super cool. Well, I can't wait to hear more about that and read more about that as it comes. On the flip side of this, do you think there's an area that maybe generative AI is getting too much hype than what it's worth? Do you think there's maybe something that's just a call out to all the operators just saying, don't believe the hype, this won't happen, based on your, you're an expert on this. I think be a really good insight into what to avoid.
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, when ChatGPT first got released, I mean, all the headlines were like, "Oh my God, like, general artificial intelligence is here, and it's going to take over the world, and we'll all be out of jobs." Yep, and if you've played with any of these technologies, you know that it's not true. It's really powerful, but it's just a tool to augment what we do. It's not going to take over. And so I think that's like where, people have to be a little skeptical of these headlines. Yeah,
you're right. The headlines are a little clickbaity. And I think we see it, and especially in automotive, we're seeing such a a staff shortage in a lot of industries. You look at the service industry, for example, and there's really a shortage in technicians. They have all these garage bays, but they can only fill 2 of them because of what they have. Whereas AI is there to kind of, in generative AI, and these tools that are being built are there to supplement those empty spots on the employee sheet, right? They're making everyone a bit more efficient. And I think that's how we have to think of it. As you said, rather than this tool that's going to take our jobs, it's actually going to make our jobs more efficient. And for operators, that should be music to their ears.
Right. It might mean that you need, instead of needing a team of 100 software engineers, maybe you just need 20 really awesome ones who can collaborate with large language models to be more efficient and more productive. And we will see a shift in each of our jobs in terms of what we can do and what we can kind of delegate to these generative AI tools. But yeah, you're right. It's not going to, I think this should be, this net, this is great news. And we will also see like a whole slew of new jobs. Think of the internet and social media, for example. A social media influencer did not exist when I was in college, right? That was not a job.
Sure.
But it's a side effect of social media platforms. And I think we're going to see new jobs that are side effects of generative AI. So I can't wait to see, how that pans out.
Yeah, and how the whole industry sort of blows up around that. You're right. It's a whole new thing being born. Rather than fear, it should be excitement. And I think embracing that and being open to it within your company culture and opening those doors, letting teams collaborate and communicate, and just don't be afraid to fail, I guess, at the end of the day.
My son is 14, and he is he's my educator when it comes to generative AI. He's been experimenting with all these new tools. He's always on the beta list of all these new companies. I'm like, how did you get access to these things? And he just signs up, tries them out. It's pretty amazing. And so again, being inclusive in terms of where you learn and who you learn from is really cool, I think.
Yeah, you must be so proud. That's super exciting. Following in the footsteps.
Yeah, I hope he doesn't get himself into trouble though, but he's I'm
sure he's got a good head on his shoulders. Absolutely. Well, look, I've learned a lot. My paper's full of notes. I've been scribbling notes like crazy. I've learned so much. It's been fantastic to talk to, and I really am excited for what you guys have coming down the pipe, and I can't wait to have that follow-up conversation after your trips and after your travels and all of your exploits. I think it's gonna be absolutely fantastic. Before we wrap, any final notes from your side?
No, thank you. This has been great. You just have to invite me to Vienna the next time.
We'll do this in person. I think that's going to be not a problem at all. Absolutely. We'll do the next show in person. Thank you very much again for the time. It's been fantastic talking to you, and I hope the listeners have absorbed as much as I have on this one.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Mark.
Perfect. And for everyone joining and listening, thank you so much for being with us on this episode. So much to learn, so much to digest, but I really hope you took as much out of this as I did. It looks like the future is positive when we look at generative AI and what it's going to provide to the automotive industry. Lots to be excited for and look ahead to. If you have any questions or comments about what you heard on this episode, head down to the podcast description. You'll see LinkedIn for both of us there. Please reach out, and we'd be happy to keep these conversations going and follow Rana's journeys as she explores on this fellowship. I certainly can't wait to see what comes out of it. So with that, we'll leave you all to have an incredible day wherever in the world you may be, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Auto Tech Show very soon. Bye for now.